Go back 100 years in the past. Not only is it a time of war, but it is a time of racial segregation. A time where men and women of color couldn't sit or even stand next to others. In this dark time in American history, the African American people were oppressed and mistreated. Now try and imagine the future in 100 years. Technology today is already advancing at an extremely fast pace. So in 100 years, the world will be a completely different place. But one of the few things that won't change will be our history of segregation. If we don't prevent genetic modifications on human beings, then there will be a whole new era of oppression, but instead of just America, it will be the world. Today, I will be persuading you all that the genetic modification of babies is wrong. Not only is it wrong, but that the genetic modification of babies will cause more problems in society today than it will prevent. As the world advances and evolves, so will the technology within it. The science of genetic modification no longer is a thing of the future, but instead something that exists and continues to develop today. With the use of genetic modification, we could remove all of mankind's problems, like disease and hereditary imperfections. But this does not come without a cost. It will be so expensive that only the wealthy will be able to afford it. Messing with the DNA of a person could create new diseases and dangers. And lastly, the cost will further divide the wealthy from the rest of the world. Genetically modifying babies is dangerous to society, and the world is a safer and better place without it. Segregation is a nasty and oppressive thing. It was obvious why it was purged from early America to begin with. It did not treat the people fairly and equally. With genetic modifications, this process of segregation could reinstate itself and come back. But this time, it would segregate the rich from the poor. In an article I found that some of the genetic modifications could cost anywhere from $500,000 up to $1 million. With this price tag, it would make it nearly impossible for the majority of the world to obtain this. Not only will rich people be the sole holders of the genetic modifications, but they will also keep their progress untouched. If the purpose of modifying humans is to remove its imperfections, then it naturally leads to the separation of people. It's like a new pair of Jordans. You don't just spend all that money to scuff them up and paint all over them. This is exactly how society will end up. They will separate themselves so that they will stay perfect. Now that I've talked about what will happen to society, I will talk about the risks of genetic modification. Gene modifications are bad because it could lead to new diseases and deformities that do not exist today. From multiple of my sources, I found that gene editing is a very complicated process and quite unpredictable. Any mistakes could lead to a danger to the human. Plus, we presently don't know exactly what combinations of genes it will take to produce the preferred outcome. And the only way to get this is through human experimentation. There is a reason why humans experiment on animals. It is because we don't know exactly how it will affect humans. But gene modifying is not the same. We can't practice on animals because we don't share the same DNA as any animal. Therefore, the only test subjects that we have are ourselves. I will now talk about how insurance will continue to divide the wealthy from the rest of the world. In modern times, insurance is all about liability. So naturally, if someone is genetically prone to a heart attack or stroke or even cancer, then they are more liable for disaster. If insurance companies could look into the genetic makeup of a person, then they could determine the liability of that person. This could cause the cost of insurance for someone with a higher likelihood of a genetic disease to be charged with more money. Overall, this would increase the insurance cost for those people who are not genetically modified and could further divide the wealthy from the rest of the world. This would make the richer richer and the poor more poor. Without the potential dangers genetically modifying babies, the world would be a safer and better place. Genetically modifying babies could likely create another movement of segregation that will end the same as the last one. New diseases and deformities could be created by the exploitation of scientists in order to achieve their goals. And lastly, the insurance costs for the natural people would essentially increase, and further divide the wealthy from the rest of the world. Instead of looking to the past and to the future and seeing segregation, I think that it's about time we look to the past and learn from it. It is in the world's best interest to turn a blind eye to genetically modifying humans to prevent another era of oppression.